The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from The Subtleties of the Inimitable Mulla Nasrudin by Idries Shah. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Acknowledgments. Many Nasrudin enthusiasts throughout the world have helped in the assembling of these tales. Their contribution has included translation, tape recording, comparing variants, reciting stories, visiting immigrant communities, and literary research. I wish to thank all of them. Representatives are the following: Abdel Karim Suraverdi, Khan Abdul Karim Khan, Goethe Ewald Anderson, Sufi Anwar Ali Shah, Sardar M. Akil Hussein Khan, Barlas, Don Ishmael Benassar, Sir Edwin Chapman Andrews, M. K. Chowdhury, Helena Edwards, Sheikh Fakhruddin Al-Amoudi, Sharif Faris El-Helabi, Feroz Abdali, Leon Flamholk, Hazrat Hafiz Abdullah, Bey Ildirim, Saeed Iskandar, Jazim El-Anazi, Edward P. Lumsden, David Wade, Yar M. Khan, and Dr. Zeki El-Mahassani. A reason for everything. Nasrudin, starving with hunger, went to a cafe and started to fill his mouth with food using both hands. His neighbour was passing and stopped. "Why eat with two hands, Mullah?" "Because I haven't got three." What you hadn't thought of. "If someone doesn't say something to entertain me," shouted a tyrannical and effete king, "I'll cut off the heads of everyone at court." Mulla Nasrudin immediately stepped forward. "Majesty, don't cut off my head. I'll do something." And what can you do?" "I can teach a donkey to read and write." The king said, "You'd better do it, or I'll flay you alive." "I'll do it," said Nasrudin, "but it will take me 10 years. "Very well," said the king. "You can have 10 years. When the court was over for the day, the grandees crowded around Nasrudin. "Mullah," they said, "can you really teach a donkey to read and write?" "No," said Nasrudin. "Then," said the wisest courtier, "you have only brought a decade's tension and anxiety, for you will surely be done to death. Oh, what folly to prefer 10 years' suffering and contemplation of death to a quick flash of the headsman's axe." "You have overlooked just one thing," said the mullah. "The king is 75 years old, and I am 80. Long before the time is up, other elements will have entered the story." Motive power. Nasrudin's little boy had been learning about books at school. He came home one day and said, "Father, could I have an encyclopedia to take to school?" "No, you cannot." "But lots of the other children have got them." "I don't care about that. You just go on the train like me and most other people." The right requirements. Someone asked the mullah, "Is it possible for a 100-year-old man to have a child?" "Yes," he said, "providing that he has an accomplice, say, in the 20s or 30s. Camel fodder. In Karnabad, Mulla Nasrudin was sitting in a tea house when a stranger walked in and sat down beside him. The newcomer said, "Why is that man over there sobbing his heart out?" "Because I have just arrived from his hometown and told him that all his winter camel fodder was lost in a fire." "Oh, it is terrible to be a bearer of such tidings," said the stranger. "It is also interesting to be the man who will shortly tell him the good news," said Nasrudin. "You see, his camels have died of a plague, so he will not need the fodder after all." Tyranny of the Majority. At one point in his life, the entire population of his village had had enough of the pleasantries and confusions of Mulla Nasrudin. They all went to the magistrate, and he gave a ruling. "Nasrudin, by the will of the people, I have to declare that you must leave the village." "Are they unanimous?" asked the mullah. "Yes, I am afraid so." "Then I refuse to go. There are plenty of them, and only one of me. If they don't like the village as it is, they can leave and build another one. But I, a single individual, how can I even start to build one small house for myself elsewhere?" A matter of language. Nasrudin went to a feast held by the Grand Lama of Tibet. "You may not know our customs," the interpreter told him, "and so I must warn you that the Grand Lama regards it as very unlucky to sneeze." "I will remember that," said Nasrudin. All the grandees of the Lama's monastery were present, and in the middle of the feast, when a brazen horn was suddenly blown, Nasrudin sneezed right into the face of the Lama. Afterwards, the interpreter said to him, "Our master is likely to have been most upset. Nobody has dared to sneeze here for 1,000 years, out of respect." "Oh, I don't think you need to give it another thought," said the mullah. "You see, I sneezed in my own language, not in his. He would never have realized what it really was." Too late. Mulla Nasrudin had been in England for several years. After settling in Liverpool, he had started to write poetry. He had composed thousands of verses, and he and his friends had done everything they could to promote him. His friend Wali found him sitting with his head in his hands, sobbing bitterly. "Cheer up, Nasrudin," he said. "It can't be as bad as all that." "But it is," said Nasrudin, "for I have just discovered that I am no poet." "All you have to do," said Wali, "is to give up poetry. Then you'll feel better." "But I can't do that. I've been elected Poet of the Century by the Academy of Culture. I've been famous since yesterday." Memory. How are you getting on with that memory training course you got by correspondence, Mulla? "Oh, I'm improving. Now I can sometimes remember that I have forgotten something." 100 years. What kind of birds should I stock my garden with as a good investment?" "Why, Mulla, I have just the thing for you. Parrots. They live for 100 years. "Well, you know how cautious I am. Just give me one to try out, and I'll be back if it does last the time you say." 9 donkeys. Nasrudin once undertook to take 9 donkeys for delivery to a local farmer. The man who entrusted them to him counted them one by one, so that Nasrudin could be sure that there really were 9. On the road, his attention was distracted by something by the wayside. Nasrudin, sitting astride one of the animals, counted them again and again. He could make it only 8. Panic-stricken, he jumped off, looked all over the place, and then counted them again. There were 9. Then he noticed a remarkable thing. When he was sitting on donkey back, he could see only 8 donkeys. When, however, he dismounted, there were 9 in full view. This is the penalty, reflected the mullah, for riding when I should, no doubt, be walking behind the donkeys. Did you have any difficulty getting them here? Asked the farmer when he arrived, dusty and dishevelled. Not after I learnt the trick of donkey drivers. Walk behind, said Nasrudin. Before that, they were full of tricks. I only hope I'm ill. Nasrudin came late among the crowd waiting for the doctor's attentions. He was repeating in a loud voice, over and over again, I hope I'm very ill. I hope I'm very ill. He so demoralized the other sufferers that they insisted on his going in to see the physician first. I only hope I'm very ill, he shouted at the doctor. Why? I'd hate to think that anyone who feels like me was really fit and well. The illness of my wife. Good morning, Mullah, said the local doctor. What can I do for you? It is about the illness of my wife. Is she ill? Yes. She said that I'd better come to tell you that she would like to see you. Shall I come at once? No. She told me afterwards that she was feeling better, and so I've come to tell you that although you would have had to come if she hadn't got better, since she has recovered, you don't need to come after all. Donkey lost. Mullah, your donkey has disappeared. Oh, thank goodness I wasn't on it at the time. Otherwise I would have disappeared too. Freakish. A man got into conversation with Nasrudin, standing outside a shop. Nasrudin had a lot of stubble on his face. The man asked, How often do you shave? 20 or 30 times a day, said the mullah. Oh, you must be a freak. No, I'm only a barber. The company's time. The mullah had taken a job in a factory. The foreman saw him lay down his tools and start to walk towards the door. What do you think you're doing? I'm going to have my hair cut. You can't have your hair cut in the company's time. But I grew it in the company's time. Not all of it you didn't. All right then, I won't have all of it off. Moral, you may have grown your hair in company time, but this does not mean that everyone will understand you. Grey and white. Nasrudin, when a child, asked his father, Why have you got grey hair? Because, Nasrudin, children asking impossible questions make a man's hair white. I see, said the mullah. That explains why your own father's hair is snow-coloured. Esoteric. A spiritual impostor named Kamza once went to Nasrudin and said, Is it true that you have secret knowledge? Tell me something of your own high experiences, was all that Nasrudin would say. Very well. At night I leave this plane of materiality and rise to the highest heaven. Do you, O master, inquired Nasrudin, feel that your face is being cooled by some fan-like object? Yes, said Kamza, thinking that this must be one of the indications of higher attainment. In that case, said Nasrudin, You had better know that the fan-like object is the tail of my long-eared donkey. Automation. The management had called a mass meeting of all employees. "My friends," said the managing director, "I have to announce that, as from a month hence, this factory is to go over to total automation." There was a gasp from the whole audience. "All processes will be carried out by machines. This will mean that the work is done better, more quickly, and more profitably." "What about us?" someone called out. "There is no cause for alarm. You will be paid as usual with annual increments. You will continue to have the same subsidized canteen and sports facilities. All you will have to do is come in on Fridays to collect your pay." Nasrudin, a union official, stood up. "Not every Friday, I hope?" Names. A certain conqueror said to Nasrudin, "Mullah, all the great rulers of the past had honorific titles with the name of God in them. There was, for instance, God gifted and God accepted, and so on. How about some such name for me?" "God forbid," said Nasrudin. The chalk. Nasrudin was chalking a slogan on a wall in London one day. Stopped by the police, he acted in such a strange way that he was handed over to the health authorities, certified insane, and sent to an asylum. The asylum was full of dangerous lunatics. When he was pushed into the courtyard of the institution, the inmates crowded him with many a shout and scream. He took his piece of chalk from his pocket. "Stand back, everyone," he shouted. Surprised, the lunatics obeyed. Nasrudin divided them into 2 teams, then drew a chalk line on the concrete between them. "Now," he said, "all of you jump under that. The first man under wins." There were terrible casualties as the teams dashed themselves again and again at the line. Nasrudin was released. Nobody was quite sure whether it was because of the injuries of the inmates or because of his resourcefulness with the chalk. Moral: what got you into trouble may get you out again. Lost property. Mulla Nasrudin was walking through the streets at midnight. The watchman asked, "What are you doing out so late, Mullah?" "My sleep has disappeared, and I'm looking for it." So hot. Nasrudin was very lazy. One day he returned from a trip to the Gulf, which is extremely hot in the summer. "Do you know what?" he asked his fellow villagers. "I have never been so continuously active in my life as I was in the Gulf." "Whatever were you doing, Mullah?" "Sweating." Is it me? Nasrudin went into a bank with a cheque to cash. "Can you identify yourself?" asked the clerk. Nasrudin took out a mirror and peered into it. "Yes, that's me all right," he said. Ambition. Nasrudin was being interviewed for employment in a department store. The personnel manager said, "We like ambitious men here. What sort of a job are you after?" "All right," said Nasrudin. "I'll have your job." "Are you mad?" "I may well be," said the mullah, "but is that a necessary qualification?" Moral: ambition is all right, providing that you don't get in the other fellow's way. Copyist. Nasrudin wanted to know more about art, so a friend took him to a gallery. "Who painted that picture?" asked the mullah, stopping in front of a huge and colourful canvas. "Picasso. You can see by the signature." "The devil! How dare he copy my calendar?" No relative. "You are very ill, mullah," said the neighbours. "Who are your relatives?" "I haven't got any." "But surely you told us that your mother is alive." "Oh, she's alive all right, but since my father divorced her, I haven't a relative in the world." Service. Nasrudin was in a patent office trying to patent a magic wand. "I'm sorry," said the clerk. "We don't patent impossible inventions." So Nasrudin waved his magic wand, and the clerk disappeared. Shoes. A thief who specialized in stealing shoes followed Nasrudin one day. The mullah went into a mosque, sat down, and started to say his prayers. Contrary to custom, he kept his shoes on. The thief, who had sat down behind him, was unable to resist intoning audibly, "A prayer said with the shoes on does not abide." "No," muttered Nasrudin over his shoulder, "but if the shoes abide, that is at least something." Two halves. Nasrudin opened a lecture agency. He knew so many people who felt that they had something interesting to say. Why not become their agent? The ones who felt that they were interesting, however, were not usually interesting people. He got many complaints. "Next time I shall make sure," he said. One day a telegram arrived from a study society. "Please supply a wit to address our group on Sunday." "This time I can make sure," said the mullah. He sent 2 of his lecturers and replied by telegram, "Wits difficult to find, so have sent 2 half-wits instead." Moral: the sum of the parts is not necessarily equal to the whole. Problem of communication. Language, said Mulla Nasrudin, was devised to describe actions as well as thoughts. That means that all you have to do is to get the words right, and everything will be understood. "But Mullah," said a friend, "surely that cannot apply to everything." "Yes, it should." "Then can you describe to me how the silk industry is carried out?" "Certainly. The first part is to get the worms and untwist that which is twisted. The second part is to get rid of the worms and retwist that which has been untwisted." The trip. Nasrudin's friend Wali slipped and fell from the immense height of the post office tower in London. The following night, Nasrudin dreamt that he was visiting heaven when he ran across Wali. "What was it like, Wali?" The impact was terrible, but the trip was terrific." The same strength. Nasrudin attended a lecture by a man who was teaching a philosophy handed down to him by someone who lived 20 years before. The mullah asked, "Is this philosophy, in its present form, as applicable today among a different community as it was 2 decades ago?" "Of course it is," said the lecturer. "That is just an example of the ridiculous questions which people ask. A teaching always remains the same. Truth cannot alter." Some time later, Mulla Nasrudin approached the same man for a job as a gardener. "You seem rather old," said the lecturer, "and I am not sure that you can manage the job." "I may look different," said Nasrudin, "but I have the same strength I had 20 years ago." Soon afterwards, the philosopher asked Nasrudin to shift a paving stone from one part of the garden to another. Tug as he might, the mullah could not lift it. "I thought that you said you were as strong as you were 20 years ago," said the sage. "I am," answered Nasrudin, "exactly as strong. 20 years ago I could not have lifted it either." Second thoughts. Hundreds of people were streaming away from the evening meeting of a certain Sufi, while Nasrudin was making his way towards the house. Suddenly Nasrudin sat down in the middle of the road. One of the people stopped and asked, "What are you doing?" Nasrudin said, "Well, I was going to the house of the Sufi, but since everyone else is going away from it, I'm having second thoughts." How to catch Nasrudin. "If you want your donkey to move faster, Nasrudin," said a neighbour, "get some ammonia and rub it on its rump." Nasrudin found that this worked. One day, feeling a little listless, he tried the same remedy on himself. The ammonia burned him so much that he started to run round and round his room. "What's the matter?" shouted his wife, unable to get hold of him. "If you want to catch me, use the contents of that bottle over there," panted Mulla Nasrudin. The Will of Allah. "May the will of Allah be done," a pious man was saying about something or other. "It always is, in any case," said Mulla Nasrudin. "How can you prove that, Mullah?" "Quite simply. If it wasn't always being done, then surely at some time or another my will would be done, wouldn't it?"
This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.